Chapter 1. Some love stories begin with a glance across a crowded room. Others start with a chance encounter on a rainy Tuesday. But the most dangerous kind of love story? The kind that begins in friendship and simmers for 20 years, waiting for the perfect moment to combust into something that will either heal two souls completely or destroy them both. Soleil Arnaud had always believed that the most beautiful jazz melodies were born from the deepest pain. Standing in her empty apartment at 2 a.m, watching her 3-year-old daughter Aurelia sleep peacefully in her toddler bed, she wondered what kind of melody her own life would create. The divorce papers were finally signed, the custody arrangements settled, and for the first time in years, she could breathe without feeling like she was stealing someone else's air. Her phone buzzed against the kitchen counter, and she smiled before even looking at the screen. Only one person texted her at this ungodly hour, checking on her the way he had for the past 20 years. Can't sleep either? Jazz at midnight helping? Sebastian. She typed back quickly, her fingers dancing over the keys with the same rhythm she'd used to message him since they were teenagers, sneaking conversations during prep school study hall. Miles Davis and insomnia. Some things never change. Soleil. Some things shouldn't. Coffee tomorrow? The usual place? Sebastian. Always. Soleil. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join our Dear Love Diaries family. Your special place in this community of heartfelt stories is waiting for you. These passionate journeys of souls connecting against all odds have brought together thousands of beautiful hearts just like yours. Make sure you hit the bell too, so you'll know immediately when a new story unfolds in our diary of love. The story of Soleil Arnaud and Sebastian Carver began in the mahogany-paneled library of Brookhaven Preparatory Academy, where 14-year-olds from different worlds discovered they spoke the same language of music and dreams. She was the scholarship girl from New Orleans, and he was legacy royalty. "Mind if I sit?" he'd asked that first day, holding a worn copy of Billie Holiday's biography. "I promise I'm not here to bother you about the scholarship thing." She'd looked up then, really looked at him, and saw something unexpected. Not pity, not curiosity, but understanding. Like he knew what it felt like to be different in a place that demanded conformity. "You can sit," she'd said quietly, her Louisiana accent still thick before Connecticut would polish her edges. "But only if you can tell me why Billie Holiday matters more than whatever Bach biography you're supposed to be reading for music theory." His answering smile had been worth the risk of conversation. Because Lady Day sang pain like it was love, and love like it was survival. Bach's brilliant, but he never had to choose between eating and making music. That was the moment Soleil Arnaud fell in friend love with Sebastian Carver. Not romantic love, that would come much later, and much more dangerously. But the kind of soul-deep recognition that happens when you meet someone who speaks your language in a world full of people who've never bothered to learn it. They became inseparable after that. Study partners who snuck to music rooms after curfew, trading jazz standards on the old piano while she hummed harmony and he played melody. He taught her to navigate prep school society, which professors to charm, which classmates to trust, how to make scholarship status seem like choice rather than necessity. She showed him music beyond his family's conservatory instructors, taught him to feel rhythm in his bones instead of just reading it off pages. "You're going to change the world," he'd told her during one of their late-night conversations senior year, both sprawled on common room couches with textbooks scattered like fallen leaves. "And you're going to own it," she'd replied without malice. Even at 18, she could see expectation pressing down on his shoulders like a perfectly tailored suit that didn't quite fit. College tried to separate them, her to Columbia on full academic scholarship, him to Harvard Business because Carver men had attended Harvard since 1923. But distance only strengthened their bond. 3-hour phone calls until dawn, care packages crossing state lines, visits that felt like coming home after months of holding your breath. She'd been there for his first heartbreak junior year, driving to Boston at midnight because his voice sounded hollow in ways that scared her. He'd been there for her graduate school interviews, coaching presentations, and reminding her she belonged in every room she entered, scholarship or no scholarship. After college, predictably, different paths emerged. She threw herself into nonprofit work, starting with a small Brooklyn education foundation and building reputation as someone who could bridge policy and practice, boardroom and classroom. He joined Carver Hospitality Industries straight from business school, beginning the slow process of modernizing a three-generation family company. They remained best friends through everything: her marriage to Donovan Watt, a high-profile attorney who'd swept her off her feet with promises of stability and partnership, and his series of relationships with women who looked perfect on paper but never quite fit the man she knew he really was. She'd called Sebastian the night Donovan proposed, partly because she always called him with big news, but partly because some treacherous part of her heart wanted to hear something in his voice: disappointment, maybe, or protest. Instead, he'd been perfectly supportive, asking the right questions about wedding dates and venues, even helping her find the perfect dress when everything felt too traditional or too modern. "You deserve to be loved exactly as you are," he'd told her the night before her wedding, his voice thick with something she'd chosen not to examine too closely. "Don't let anyone try to change you." If only she'd understood what he was really trying to say. The marriage had been a disaster from the beginning, though it took years to recognize the signs. Donovan was brilliant at public performance, devoted husband bringing flowers to work events, speaking eloquently about supporting her career, photographing beautifully at charity galas and political fundraisers. Privately, he was a master of emotional warfare, chipping away at her confidence with surgical precision. "Your accent comes back when you're excited," he'd tell her after dinner parties with his colleagues. "It makes you sound less educated. Maybe you should let me handle budget conversations with the foundation board. Numbers aren't really your strength. I'm just saying, if you spent less time on those community programs and more time on initiatives that actually matter to donors." Each comment was delivered with a smile, couched in concern for her success, her image, and her effectiveness. It took 5 years to realize that the woman she saw in mirrors every morning, quiet, careful, always second-guessing herself, bore no resemblance to the confident girl who'd debated prep school professors and charmed Columbia admissions officers. Sebastian had tried to warn her in his careful way. Never directly criticizing Donovan, but asking pointed questions about her happiness, her dreams, whether she still felt like herself. She'd deflected every inquiry, partly from loyalty to her marriage but mostly from shame. How could she admit that the life she'd built so carefully was slowly suffocating her? The breaking point came 18 months ago, when she discovered Donovan's affair with his junior associate, not his first, as she learned, but apparently his most serious. The confrontation was brutal, his casual admission of infidelity mixed with blame for her inadequacy as a wife, her failure to provide the sophisticated partnership his career required. "You were always going to be a diversity hire, Soleil," he'd said, voice calm and cutting as a surgical blade. "In marriage, in non-profit work, in every room you've ever entered. I tried to elevate you, but you can't polish that Louisiana roughness enough to make it really shine." She'd called Sebastian that night, sobbing into the phone while Aurelia slept in the next room, and he'd been on the next plane from San Francisco, or he'd been handling a hotel acquisition. No questions, no "I told you so," just his solid presence in her living room and his quiet voice reminding her who she was. "He's wrong about everything," Sebastian had said, hands gentle on her shoulders as she cried 18 years of suppressed fears onto his expensive shirt. "You've never been anyone's diversity hire. You've earned every single thing you've accomplished, and anyone who can't see that doesn't deserve to share your life." That had been the beginning of divorce proceedings, and Sebastian had been there for every ugly moment. Court appearances where Donovan's legal team tried to paint her as an unfit mother, custody negotiations that felt like emotional terrorism, and the slow process of rebuilding a life she'd almost forgotten how to live. Now, 6 months after the divorce was finalized, she was finally starting to breathe again. The foundation job with Carver Educational Initiatives had been Sebastian's idea, a consulting position that would let her design community education programs while earning enough to rebuild savings and establish independence. She'd been hesitant at first, worried about accepting what felt like charity, but he'd convinced her it was purely business. "We've been trying to find someone with your exact skill set for months," he'd insisted during their coffee meeting in the neutral territory of her favorite cafe. "Community outreach experience, policy background, proven track record with underserved populations. The fact that I know you're brilliant is just a bonus." The job had turned out to be exactly what she needed. Meaningful work that reminded her why she'd chosen education policy in the first place, colleagues who respected her expertise, and creative freedom to design programs that served communities rather than just looking good in grant applications. Working closely with Sebastian again had been complicated. Years of friendship had taught her to read his moods like sheet music, to anticipate his thoughts before he voiced them, to find comfort in his presence that she'd never experienced with anyone else. But lately, she'd been noticing things that felt dangerous to acknowledge. The way his eyes lingered on her face when he thought she wasn't looking. The careful space he maintained between them during meetings, like he were fighting the urge to move closer. The intensity in his voice when he talked about the foundation's work, like her passion for projects, was igniting something in him that went beyond professional admiration. And her own reactions, which terrified her more than his. The flutter in her stomach when he laughed at her jokes. The electric awareness when their hands brushed over shared documents. The way she found herself choosing clothes more carefully on days when she knew they'd be working together, not from vanity but from some deep-seated desire to be beautiful in his eyes. She'd been married for 7 years, had dated plenty before Donovan, but what she felt around Sebastian was entirely different. Deeper than attraction, more complex than affection, more dangerous than anything she'd ever experienced. It felt like recognition, like coming home, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing that jumping might be the only way to learn how to fly. But she couldn't afford to jump. Not now, not when Aurelia needed stability, not when she was just beginning to trust her own judgment again. Sebastian was her oldest friend, her most constant source of support, and she couldn't risk losing that for something as uncertain as romantic love. Even if the way he looked at her lately suggested that 20 years of careful friendship might be approaching its expiration date. Chapter 2. 3 months into working at the Carver Educational Foundation, Soleil had settled into rhythms that felt both professionally satisfying and personally treacherous. The 20th floor of the Carver Industries building had become her second home, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Connecticut River that never failed to inspire her during long strategy sessions. This particular Thursday morning found her in Conference Room B, surrounded by budget spreadsheets and program proposals, preparing for the monthly board presentation that would determine funding for the next quarter's community initiatives. She'd been at the office since 6 a.m., partly because she wanted everything perfect, but mostly because she'd woken from another dream about Sebastian and needed work's distraction to shake off the lingering warmth of imagined intimacy. "You're here early." His voice from the doorway made her look up from her laptop, and she felt that familiar flutter of awareness she'd been trying to ignore for months. Sebastian Carver at 32 was devastating in ways 18-year-old Sebastian had only hinted at. The gangly height had filled out into broad shoulders and confident posture, boyish features sharpened into masculine beauty that belonged on magazine covers, and years of carrying family responsibility had given him an authoritative presence that made boardrooms fall silent when he spoke. But it was his eyes that undid her, still the same gentle brown that had made her trust him in the prep school library, still capable of seeing straight through whatever mask she wore to the truth underneath. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, gesturing to the coffee cup that had gone cold an hour ago. "You know how I get before big presentations. I know how you get, period." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, and she noticed he was carrying 2 fresh cups from the coffee shop downstairs. "Vanilla latte, extra shot, oat milk. You don't have to take care of me, Seb." But she accepted the coffee gratefully, their fingers brushing as he handed it over. The contact lasted exactly 1 second longer than necessary, and she saw something flicker in his expression before he moved to the chair across from her. "Maybe I want to." The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that neither was quite ready to acknowledge. "Besides, this presentation matters to me too. These programs are exactly what the foundation should be doing." She'd been working on a comprehensive initiative to bring arts education to underserved schools throughout Connecticut, building partnerships between the foundation and local community centers to provide after-school programs that would bridge the gap between academic learning and creative expression. It was ambitious, expensive, and exactly the kind of work that had drawn her to education policy in the first place. "The budget projections look solid," she said, falling back on professional topics because personal ones felt too dangerous with him sitting so close. "Dr. Finney thinks we can serve over 1,000 students in the first year if we get full funding approval. James has been singing your praises since the day you started." Sebastian leaned back in his chair, expression warm with pride that made her chest tighten. "Says you're the best hire the foundation has made in years." He's being kind. He's being honest. And so am I when I say that watching you present these programs to the board is going to be the highlight of my month. There was something in his voice, admiration, yes, but also something deeper that made her look up from her notes to meet his eyes. The conference room suddenly felt smaller, morning light streaming through windows, casting everything in golden intimacy. Seb, she started, then stopped, because she didn't know how to finish that sentence without crossing lines they'd spent so long respecting. Her phone buzzed against the table, breaking the moment, and she glanced down to see a text from Keisha. "Good luck today, babe. Show those fancy board members how it's done. Also, when are you going to admit you're in love with your boss?" Heat flooded her cheeks as she quickly turned the phone face down, but not before Sebastian caught her expression. "Everything okay?" Just Keisha being Keisha. She focused determinedly on her presentation notes, trying to ignore the way he was looking at her. "She has opinions about my life that she's not shy about sharing. Smart woman, Keisha. You should listen to her more often." Something in his tone made her glance up again, and the expression on his face was so openly affectionate, so clearly longing, that her breath caught in her throat. 20 years of careful friendship trembled on the edge of transformation, and she felt like she was standing at the precipice of something that would change everything. Before she could respond, Dr. James Finney entered with his arms full of folders and cheerfully harried expression, reviewing community partnership agreements before board members arrived in expensive suits with tablets loaded with questions that would determine her carefully crafted program's fate. The presentation itself passed in a blur of budget discussions and implementation timelines, but through community impact projections and performance metrics, she was acutely aware of Sebastian's presence at the head of the table, the way he supported her proposals with quiet authority, the pride in his voice when he introduced her work to the board. "This is exactly the kind of innovative programming the foundation should be supporting," he said during final discussion. "Soleil has designed something that will have lasting impact on communities that need it most, and she has the expertise to ensure successful implementation." The vote was unanimous in favor of full funding, and as board members filed out offering congratulations and enthusiasm for the project launch, Soleil felt a surge of professional satisfaction that had been missing from her life for too long. "Congratulations," Sebastian said quietly, hanging back as the room emptied. "You were brilliant in there." "We were brilliant," she corrected. "This only works because you've given me the support to do it right." They were alone again, afternoon sun casting long shadows across the conference table, and that dangerous awareness was building between them like gathering storm clouds. She should leave, should gather her materials and retreat to her office where she could process the presentation's success without the distraction of wondering what it would feel like if he moved just a little closer. Instead, she found herself standing frozen as he stepped around the table toward her, expression serious and intent. "Soleil." Her name on his lips sounded different than it had that morning, weighted with years of unspoken feelings and the sudden possibility that they might finally be ready to speak them aloud. "Yes? Have dinner with me tonight. Not a work dinner, not a celebration meal with colleagues. Just dinner. You and me, talking about things that have nothing to do with foundation business." Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stared up at him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, the hope he was trying to keep carefully controlled. This was the moment she'd been both dreading and anticipating for months, the conversation that would either ruin their years of friendship or transform it into something that could save them both. "Seb, She took a breath, gathering courage. "What are we doing here?" "I don't know." His honesty was devastating. "But I know I can't keep pretending that having you this close every day isn't driving me insane. I know I can't keep watching you rebuild your life and not want to be part of it in ways that go beyond friendship. I'm not ready for complicated," she whispered, even as every cell in her body screamed that she'd been ready for him her entire adult life. "Then we'll keep it simple. Dinner, conversation, no pressure, no expectations." "But Soleil." He reached out carefully, fingers brushing her wrist in the lightest possible touch. "I can't keep acting like 20 years of loving you doesn't mean anything." The words hit her like lightning, illuminating everything she'd been trying to keep hidden in dark corners of her heart. 20 years. He'd been carrying this for 20 years, the same length of time she'd been telling herself that what she felt for him was just friendship, just comfort, just the safe harbor of someone who understood her better than she understood herself. One dinner, she heard herself saying, voice barely above a whisper. But Aurelia has to come. I don't have a babysitter tonight, and I'm not ready to. This can't be a date, Seb. Not yet. His smile was soft and understanding, tinged with relief that she hadn't run away completely. I've been wanting to see Aurelia anyway. She's been asking when Uncle Seb is coming to visit again. Uncle Seb. The title that had never felt quite right, because what Aurelia responded to in Sebastian wasn't avuncular at all. It was paternal, protective, the kind of natural ease with children that suggested he'd been thinking about being a father long before he'd found someone he wanted to parent with. My place, 7 o'clock, she said before she could change her mind. I'll cook. I'll bring wine. And jazz records, in case your collection needs updating. My collection is perfectly curated, thank you very much. We'll see about that. That evening, as Soleil stirred red beans and rice on her West Hartford apartment stove while Aurelia played with her dollhouse at the kitchen table, she felt like she might hyperventilate. She'd changed clothes 3 times, settling on a deep blue wrap dress casual enough for dinner at home but flattering enough to make her feel confident. Her hair was twisted in a loose bun with curls framing her face, just enough makeup to enhance features without looking like she was trying too hard. Mama, when is Uncle Seb coming? Aurelia asked for the 4th time in 10 minutes, her 3-year-old sense of time making 7 o'clock feel like eternity. Soon, baby. He's bringing music for us to listen to while we eat. Will he play piano with you? The innocent question made Soleil's chest tighten with memory and anticipation. Sebastian's hands on keys, her voice weaving around his melody, the kind of musical intimacy they'd shared since prep school but which felt entirely different now that she'd admitted to herself, if not to him, that she'd been in love with him for longer than she'd been willing to acknowledge. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock, because Sebastian had always been precisely punctual, and Aurelia shrieked with excitement as she ran to the front door. Soleil followed, smoothing her dress nervously, and opened the door to find Sebastian holding wine in one hand and vintage records in the other, expression warm and slightly nervous. Uncle Seb. Aurelia launched herself at his legs, and he bent to scoop her up with practiced ease, balancing her on one hip while keeping wine and records safely out of reach. Hey there, beautiful girl. You've gotten so big since I saw you last week. I growed 2 whole inches. Aurelia announced proudly, holding up 2 fingers. 2 inches is very impressive. His eyes found Soleil's over Aurelia's head, and she felt that familiar flutter of awareness intensified by the sight of him holding her daughter like she belonged there. Hi. Hi yourself. She stepped back to let him in, catching the scent of his cologne, something subtle and expensive that she associated with safety and comfort and, lately, dreams that left her restless and wanting. You found everything okay? Your directions were perfect, as always. He set Aurelia down gently and handed Soleil the wine, their fingers brushing in contact that felt electric despite its brevity. And I brought the records I promised. Some vintage Blue Note pressings I thought you might appreciate. She glanced at album covers and felt her breath catch. Seb, these are collector's items. I can't let you just. They're meant to be played, not displayed. Besides, if anyone's going to appreciate Art Blakey properly, it's you. The casual generosity was so typically Sebastian that it made her heart ache. In their years of friendship, he'd never stopped paying attention to what made her happy, never stopped finding ways to give her pieces of the world that spoke to her soul. Dinner conversation flowed as easily as it always had between them, Aurelia chattering about preschool and her friend Emma's new puppy while Sebastian listened with focused attention that most adults reserved for other adults. He asked follow-up questions about her finger painting project, nodded seriously when she explained sandbox social dynamics, and helped her cut food without being asked. After dinner, while Soleil loaded the dishwasher, Sebastian and Aurelia moved to the living room where he put on one of the vintage records. Miles Davis filled the apartment, smooth and melancholy and perfect for golden hour light streaming through windows. Will you play piano, Uncle Seb? Aurelia asked, climbing onto the bench and patting the space beside her. If your mama doesn't mind. Soleil looked up from the kitchen to find both of them watching her expectantly, and her heart clenched at the picture they made together, this man who'd been part of her life for so long, and her daughter who'd claimed him as family without question. I don't mind, she said softly, moving to lean against the piano as Sebastian's hands found the keys. He started with something simple, a melody Aurelia could follow along with by pressing random keys that somehow harmonized with his playing. But as the little girl's attention wandered to toys scattered across the floor, his playing shifted into something more complex, a jazz standard Soleil recognized from their prep school days. The very thought of you, she murmured, and he glanced up with a smile that made her stomach flutter. You always did have the best musical memory. Some songs are hard to forget. Their eyes held for a moment that felt charged with meaning, and then Aurelia was tugging on Sebastian's sleeve, demanding he play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star so she could sing along. The domestic moment should have felt safe, normal, but there was an undercurrent of tension that made every casual touch, every shared glance feel weighted with possibility. By 8:30, Aurelia was rubbing her eyes and leaning against Sebastian's shoulder with the boneless exhaustion of a 3-year-old who'd had a big day. Soleil carried her to bed, settling her into pajamas and reading 2 picture books before tucking her in with her favorite stuffed elephant. Mama? Aurelia's voice was sleepy but thoughtful. Is Uncle Seb gonna be my daddy? The question hit Soleil like a physical blow, so unexpected and innocent that she had to grip the edge of the toddler bed to steady herself. Why would you ask that, baby? Because he looks at you like Daddy looked at the lady on his phone. But nicer. Out of the mouths of babes. Soleil's heart clenched as she realized her 3-year-old had noticed things about Sebastian's feelings that she'd been trying to deny for months. And worse, Aurelia had memories of Donovan's infidelity that Soleil had hoped were too vague to understand. Uncle Seb is a very good friend, she said carefully. He cares about both of us very much. But he could be my daddy if you wanted, right? Because he already knows how to make you smile. The observation was so astute, so heartbreakingly accurate, that Soleil had to blink back tears. We'll see, sweetheart. For now, just know that you're loved by lots of people, okay? She found him in the kitchen, washing wine glasses they'd left on the counter, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that were unfairly attractive. The sight of him moving comfortably through her space, taking care of domestic tasks without being asked, made something deep in her chest ache with longing. You don't have to do that, she said softly, not wanting to break the peaceful quiet. I know. He glanced over his shoulder with a smile. But I wanted to. How's our girl? Our girl. The casual possessiveness in his voice made her breath catch, made her wonder if he'd chosen those words deliberately or if they'd slipped out without conscious thought. She asked if you were going to be her daddy. Sebastian's hand stilled on the glass he was drying, and when he turned to face her fully, his expression was carefully controlled. What did you tell her? That you're a good friend who cares about us. She moved closer, drawn by something in his eyes that looked like hope and fear in equal measure. But Seb, she sees things. The way you look at me, the way you are with her. She's already thinking of you as family. And how do you feel about that? The question hung between them, loaded with years of history and the weight of decisions that would affect not just them but the little girl sleeping down the hall. Soleil looked at Sebastian, really looked at him, and saw the man who'd been her anchor through every storm, who'd never asked for more than she was willing to give but who'd never stopped hoping that someday she might be ready to offer everything. Terrified, she admitted quietly. And hopeful. And completely confused about what I'm supposed to do with 20 years of loving you that I convinced myself was just friendship. The confession left her breathless and vulnerable, standing in her kitchen with her heart laid bare, waiting for his response. He set down the dish towel and moved toward her slowly, like he was afraid she might bolt if he moved too quickly. Soleil. Her name was a prayer on his lips. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that maybe Keisha has been right this whole time. Maybe I've been in love with you since I was 18 and just too scared to admit it because losing you would destroy me. You're not going to lose me. He reached for her hands, his touch gentle but sure. Soleil, you could never lose me. Even if you decided that this, he gestured between them, was too complicated, too risky, I would still be here. I would still be your friend, still be in Aurelia's life if you wanted me there. Nothing changes that. Everything changes that. She looked down at their joined hands, marveling at how right it felt to touch him with intention instead of accident. Because now I know that when you hold my hand, you're thinking about holding more than just my hand. Now I know that when you smile at me, it's not just friendship. Now I know that I've been wanting you to kiss me for months and pretending I didn't. His intake of breath was sharp and audible. Soleil. I know it's complicated. I know I come with baggage and a 3-year-old and an ex-husband who's going to make our lives difficult. I know I'm not the sophisticated kind of woman who usually fits into your world. Stop. His voice was firm enough to cut through her spiraling doubts. Don't you dare finish that sentence. Don't you dare let Donovan's poison convince you that you're not enough for anyone's world, especially mine. He stepped closer, until she could feel warmth radiating from his body, until she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. You want to know what I think when I hold your hand? I think about how perfectly you fit against me. I think about how much I love the way you gesture when you're passionate about something. I think about how brave you are, how strong, how you've built this beautiful life for yourself and Aurelia despite everything Donovan tried to take from you. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs tracing her cheekbones with reverent gentleness. And when I smile at you? I'm thinking about how you're the first person I want to tell when something good happens. How you're the only person who's ever seen all the parts of me, the family expectations, the business pressure, and loved all of it anyway. Seb. Her voice was barely a whisper. And when you say you've been wanting me to kiss you? His forehead rested against hers, their breath mingling in the small space between them. I've been dreaming about kissing you since I was 16 and didn't understand why watching you date other people felt like dying. The confession broke something open in her chest, the years of careful walls crumbling under the weight of finally hearing words she'd never dared hope for. Why didn't you ever say anything? Because you deserved to choose your path without the pressure of knowing how I felt. Because I was terrified that telling you would ruin the best friendship I've ever had. Because. He paused, his thumb tracing her lower lip with heartbreaking tenderness. Because I love you too much to risk hurting you, and I didn't trust myself to love you the right way. And now? Now I'm still terrified, but I'm more afraid of losing you to my cowardice than I am of screwing this up. His eyes searched hers, looking for permission, for certainty, for some sign that she was ready to take this leap with him. Now I think maybe 20 years of friendship might be the best foundation for forever that two people could ask for. The word forever hung between them like a promise and a question, and Soleil felt herself standing at the precipice of everything she'd ever wanted and been too afraid to reach for. Kiss me, she whispered, and watched his eyes go dark with want and wonder. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He kissed her like he'd been thinking about it for 20 years, which she supposed he had. Soft at first, questioning, giving her room to change her mind or pull away. But when she melted against him, hands fisting in the fabric of his shirt to pull him closer, he deepened the kiss with hunger that made her knees weak. This was nothing like the careful, performative affection she'd shared with Donovan. This was fire and recognition and coming home all at once. Sebastian kissed her like she was precious and powerful, like he wanted to memorize the taste of her, like he'd been starving and she was sustenance. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers again and laughed softly. What's funny? She asked, voice still breathless. I was just thinking that if 16-year-old me could see this moment, he'd probably faint. 16-year-old you was pretty devastating himself. I had such a crush on you in junior year. You had a crush on me? His expression was delighted and incredulous. When? Why didn't I know about this? Because you were dating Amanda Oakland and seemed perfectly happy about it. And because I was 16 and terrified that admitting I liked you would ruin our friendship. Amanda Oakland was a mistake. A pretty, age-appropriate mistake that I dated because I thought it would help me get over being in love with my best friend. Did it work? Not even a little bit. He traced the curve of her jaw with gentle fingers. Nothing worked. 20 years, Soleil. I've loved you for 20 years. The magnitude of that devotion should have felt overwhelming, but instead it felt like safety, like the most natural thing in the world. Like something that had been true for so long that acknowledging it was just catching up to reality. What happens now? She asked, because the practical part of her mind was already spinning through complications: Aurelia's adjustment, workplace dynamics, the inevitable confrontation with Donovan when he found out. Now we take it one day at a time. We figure out how to be together in ways that work for all three of us. We deal with whatever challenges come up the same way we've dealt with everything else, together. His certainty was comforting, but she could feel anxiety creeping in around the edges of her happiness. Donovan is going to lose his mind when he finds out. He'll try to use this against me in custody proceedings, claim that I'm exposing Aurelia to inappropriate influences or unstable relationships. Let him try. Sebastian's voice carried a note of steel that she'd heard him use in boardroom negotiations but never in personal conversations. I have resources, Soleil. Legal resources, financial resources, and influence in circles where his reputation matters. If he wants to make this a fight, he'll lose. The protective fury in his tone should have worried her. She'd spent too many years with a man who used power as a weapon, but somehow Sebastian's strength felt different. Not possessive or controlling, but sheltering. Like he was offering to be her shield without trying to become her cage. I don't want you to have to fight my battles for me, she said quietly. I don't want to fight your battles for you either. I want to fight them with you. There's a difference. The distinction mattered more than she could express. Partnership instead of protection. Equality instead of rescue. This is really happening, she said wonderingly, looking up into the face she'd known longer than any other, seeing it transformed by the acknowledgement of what had always been simmering beneath the surface of their friendship. This is really happening, he confirmed, and kissed her again, softer this time but no less devastating. They talked until almost midnight, curled together on her couch with jazz playing softly in the background, mapping out the careful steps they'd take to build something real without disrupting Aurelia's sense of security. Sebastian would continue coming to dinner regularly, as he had been, but now there would be intention behind his presence. They'd tell Aurelia gradually, let her adjust to the idea of Uncle Seb becoming something more. They'd be discreet at work until they figured out the best way to handle the personal relationship between boss and employee. I should go, he said eventually, though neither of them made any move to untangle from their position on the couch. You have that community center site visit tomorrow, and I have back-to-back meetings starting at 8. You should, she agreed, but her hand was still resting over his heart, feeling the steady rhythm that had become her favorite sound. Will you have dinner with me Friday? Just the two of us this time. Somewhere nice, where I can take you on a proper date. A proper date, she repeated, testing the words. I haven't been on one of those in, well, longer than I want to think about. Then we'll take it slow. Whatever pace feels right for you. He stood reluctantly, and she walked him to the door, both of them moving like they were underwater, reluctant to end the evening that had changed everything. Soleil, he said softly, his hand on the doorknob. I need you to know that this isn't just about wanting you, though God knows I do. This is about loving you. All of you. Your brilliant mind and your generous heart, and your terrible taste in late-night jazz documentaries and the way you've rebuilt your entire life from scratch. I love who you are, not just how you make me feel. The words wrapped around her heart like a healing balm, addressing fears she hadn't even realized she was carrying. I love you too, she said simply, and watched his face light up like she'd given him the moon. He kissed her goodnight at the door, a soft press of lips that tasted like promise and possibility, and she watched from her window as he drove away, already missing him even as her heart sang with the knowledge that this was just the beginning. Later, lying in bed and staring at the ceiling, Soleil replayed every moment of the evening. The way Sebastian had held Aurelia, the music filling her apartment, the feel of his hands in her hair as he kissed her. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she fell asleep without anxiety gnawing at her chest, without the voice in her head cataloging everything that could go wrong. Instead, she dreamed of jazz music in gentle hands and a future that finally looked like something worth hoping for. Chapter 3. 3 weeks of carefully structured dating had passed in a blur of stolen kisses and gradually increasing intimacy, each moment feeling both entirely new and like something they'd been building toward their entire adult lives. Sebastian had been true to his word about taking things slowly, respecting her need to maintain stability for Aurelia while exploring what it meant to be lovers instead of just friends. Their first official date had been dinner at a small French restaurant in West Hartford, intimate enough for real conversation but public enough that she'd felt safe. He'd asked about her dreams for the foundation programs, listened with genuine interest as she described her vision for expanding arts education throughout Connecticut's underserved communities, and made her laugh with stories from his latest business trip to survey potential hotel sites in Portland. "You're different when you talk about the foundation work," he'd observed over dessert, eyes warm with affection and admiration. "More confident. Like you're finally doing exactly what you were meant to do." "I feel different," she'd admitted. "Like I'm remembering who I was before I started second-guessing everything. I've always known who you were. I'm just glad you're remembering too." The second date had been more adventurous, a jazz club in New Haven where they'd listened to live music and danced to slow ballads, her body fitting against his like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. The third had been a family affair, Sebastian joining her in Aurelia for a trip to the Children's Museum, where he'd patiently helped a 3-year-old navigate interactive exhibits while Soleil watched and fell a little more in love with both of them. Now, on this crisp November morning, Soleil stood in the main hallway of Hartford's North End Community Center, clipboard in hand, conducting her weekly site visit to monitor program implementation and gather feedback from students and staff. The center served one of the city's most underserved neighborhoods, and seeing the kids light up when they talked about their classes reminded her why she'd chosen education policy over more lucrative career paths. "Miss Soleil." A voice called from across the hall, and she turned to see Marcus, a 12-year-old regular who'd been struggling with anger management issues when the program started. "Come listen to what we learned in music class." She followed him to the music room, where a group of middle schoolers were gathered around an old upright piano, taking turns playing simple melodies while their instructor, Jamie, provided gentle guidance. "We're learning about improvisation," Marcus explained proudly. "Jamie says jazz is just having a conversation with music instead of words." "That's a beautiful way to think about it," Soleil said, remembering Sebastian's patient explanations of jazz theory during their prep school days, the way he'd taught her to hear melody and harmony as separate voices joining together to create something greater than either could achieve alone. The parallel to her current situation wasn't lost on her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sebastian. "How's the site visit going? Marcus staying out of trouble?" She smiled, typing back, "He's playing jazz piano and loving it. Your foundation is changing lives." "Our foundation. Our programs. Don't forget you're the genius behind all this." "Dinner tonight? Aurelia's been asking if Uncle Seb is coming over. Wouldn't miss it. I'll bring takeout from that Thai place she likes." "You're going to spoil her." "I'm going to spoil both of you." The casual intimacy of the text exchange, the easy assumption that he'd be part of their evening routine, should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. As she wrapped up the site visit, reviewing documentation that showed a remarkable transformation in students like Marcus, from behavioral problems to confident young musicians, Soleil felt the familiar rush of professional satisfaction that came from seeing vision translate into measurable impact. Her phone rang as she was walking to her car, and she glanced at the screen to see Donovan's name. Her stomach immediately clenched with familiar anxiety, but the feeling was different now, still unpleasant, but no longer paralyzing. She had someone in her corner now, someone who would stand with her against whatever manipulation Donovan tried to unleash. "Hello, Donovan." "Soleil. I hope you're having a productive day playing social worker." His tone carried the familiar condescension that had worn away her confidence during their marriage, but now it just made her tired. "What do you need?" "I'm working. I need to discuss modifications to our custody arrangement. I'll be traveling more frequently for the firm's international expansion, and I want to adjust the visitation schedule to accommodate my new responsibilities." Relief and suspicion warred in her chest. Fewer visits from Donovan meant less disruption for Aurelia, but she'd learned not to trust anything that seemed too convenient where her ex-husband was concerned. "What kind of modifications?" "Longer intervals between visits, but extended time when I am available. Perhaps taking her for full weeks during school breaks instead of alternating weekends. I'll need to review any proposed changes with my attorney before agreeing to anything." "Of course you will. Always so suspicious, Soleil. It's exhausting." The casual cruelty in his voice was designed to provoke the old response: apologies, self-doubt, the desperate need to smooth over conflict even when she wasn't the one creating it. Instead, she felt nothing but mild annoyance. Is there anything else? I have work to finish. Actually, yes. I've been hearing interesting rumors about your personal life. Something about dinner dates with your employer? I hope you're being appropriately discreet, for Aurelia's sake. Ice ran through her veins at the calculated threat in his tone. She should have known that Donovan would have sources monitoring her activities, should have anticipated that he'd use any new relationship as ammunition in their ongoing custody battles. My personal relationships are none of your concern as long as they don't affect Aurelia, which they don't. We'll see about that. I'd hate for questions about your judgment to become relevant in future custody proceedings. The line went dead, leaving Soleil staring at her phone with hands that were only slightly trembling. She'd known this confrontation was coming eventually, had discussed with Sebastian how they'd handle Donovan's inevitable attempts at manipulation. But hearing the threat voiced so casually brought back every fear she'd been trying to suppress about complicating her daughter's life for the sake of her own happiness. She sat in her car for a moment, processing the conversation, then she called Sebastian. Where are you? His voice was carefully controlled, but she could hear the anger underneath when she relayed the conversation. Still at the community center. Just finishing up the site visit. I'm coming to get you. We need to talk about this, and I don't want you driving while you're upset. Seb, I'm fine. I knew this was coming. I know you did. But you're not handling it alone. Not anymore. The certainty in his voice steadied something in her chest that had been shaking since Donovan's call. Okay. I'll wait for you. 20 minutes later, she watched Sebastian's BMW pull into the community center parking lot, and something in her shoulders relaxed at the sight of him walking toward the building with purposeful strides. He looked every inch the successful businessman in his tailored suit and expensive watch, but his expression carried the protective intensity she'd seen glimpses of over the years whenever someone threatened something he cared about. Hi, she said softly when he reached her in the lobby. Hi yourself. He pulled her into his arms without hesitation, and she melted against his chest with relief that she didn't have to carry this fear alone. Talk to me. What exactly did he say? She relayed the conversation as accurately as she could, watching Sebastian's jaw tighten with each casual cruelty, each calculated threat. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, one hand stroking her hair while the other held her securely against him. He's fishing, Sebastian said finally. Testing to see how you'll react, whether he can still control your decisions through intimidation. What if he's not? What if he tries to use our relationship against me in court? Then we fight. Soleil, look at me. He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. Donovan's power over you only exists if you're afraid of him. You're a devoted mother with a stable job and a home full of love. You're in a relationship with someone who's been part of Aurelia's life for months, someone with resources and reputation and absolutely no interest in backing down from a legal fight. But what if? No what ifs. We deal with whatever happens, not with the fears he wants you to carry around. His thumbs traced her cheekbones with gentle insistence. Do you trust me? With my life. Then trust me with this. Trust us with this. We're not kids anymore, Soleil. We're adults with resources and support systems and years of knowing how to take care of each other. The steadiness in his voice, the absolute certainty that they could handle whatever Donovan threw at them, began to push back against the familiar panic that had been building in her chest. I'm scared, she admitted quietly. I know. But scared doesn't mean helpless. Scared doesn't mean alone. And scared doesn't mean you have to choose between being happy and protecting Aurelia. He was right, and some part of her had known it even while Donovan's voice was echoing in her ear. Her ex-husband's threats were designed to make her retreat, to convince her that love was a luxury she couldn't afford, that safety meant isolation. But Sebastian wasn't asking her to choose between him and her daughter. He was offering to stand with both of them, to build something strong enough to weather whatever storms came their way. Take me home, she said, and watched his expression soften with relief. That evening, as they settled around the kitchen table sharing pad thai and spring rolls while Aurelia chattered about her day, Soleil felt the last of her anxiety fade away. This was her family, unconventional, newly formed, built on years of friendship and 3 weeks of acknowledged love, but unshakable in its foundation. Whatever Donovan tried to threaten, whatever legal battles lay ahead, whatever challenges they'd face as they built their life together, none of it could touch the simple truth of this moment. The three of them around her kitchen table, sharing food and laughter and the easy intimacy of people who belong together. Later, after Aurelia was in bed and they were cleaning up the dinner dishes together, Sebastian broached the subject they'd been carefully avoiding all evening. "I want to call my attorney tomorrow," he said quietly, loading plates into the dishwasher. "Get his opinion on what Donovan can do legally, what kind of preparation we should be doing." "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." He turned to face her, expression serious but calm. "Soleil, I'm not going anywhere. Whatever this takes, however long it takes, I'm here. But I want us to be prepared, not reactive." The quiet confidence in his voice steadied something in her chest that had been shaky since Donovan's call. "Okay. But I pay for my legal representation. I'm not letting you fight my battles for me." "Our battles," he corrected, stepping closer to wrap his arms around her waist. "And we'll figure out the logistics later. For now, I just need you to know that Donovan doesn't get to dictate how we live our lives." She leaned into his embrace, marveling at how safe she felt in his arms, how natural it had become to seek comfort in his strength without losing her own independence. "I love you," she said simply, the words still feeling new and precious on her tongue. "I love you, too. Both of you. And I'll be damned if I let anyone threaten that." He kissed her then, soft and sure and full of promise, and Soleil thought about jazz music and improvisation, about finding harmony even when the melody seemed uncertain. Whatever came next, they'd face it together, creating something beautiful from whatever notes life decided to play. I'd love to hear about a time when friendship surprised you by becoming something deeper. Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else who's wondering if they should take that leap of faith. Chapter 4. 2 months after that first kiss in her kitchen, Soleil found herself standing in the elegant lobby of Hartford's finest hotel, smoothing the skirt of her deep burgundy gown and trying to comb the butterflies that had nothing to do with her upcoming presentation and everything to do with the man beside her. The Carver Industries annual gala was exactly the kind of event she'd learned to navigate during her marriage to Donovan. 500 of Connecticut's most influential people gathered to raise money for charitable causes while networking and displaying wealth with tasteful ostentation. But what was different this year was that she belonged here not as someone's plus one, but as the director of community outreach for the Carver Educational Foundation, and as Sebastian Carver's girlfriend, a relationship they'd made quietly public 6 weeks earlier. "You look incredible," Sebastian murmured against her ear as they waited for the elevator to the 20th floor ballroom. "I feel like I'm playing dress up," she admitted, though the gown that Keisha had insisted she buy made her feel more confident than she'd expected. "You feel like you're exactly where you belong, because you are." His hand found the small of her back, the familiar touch grounding her in the certainty that she wasn't facing this evening alone. The ballroom was stunning, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over tables draped in ivory linens, autumn floral arrangements in rich golds and deep reds, a jazz quartet playing softly on a small stage. She recognized several faces from Hartford's social scene, including a few who'd been present at similar events during her marriage to Donovan. For the next hour, Soleil moved through the cocktail reception with growing confidence, discussing program outcomes and expansion plans with donors, board members, and community leaders who seemed genuinely interested in the foundation's work. Sebastian stayed close but not possessively so, jumping into conversations when his business expertise was relevant but letting her take the lead on educational policy discussions. "You're in your element," he observed during a brief moment when they found themselves alone near the bar. "I love watching you talk about the programs. You light up. I love the work. It feels like everything I've learned over the past 10 years is finally coming together in something that matters." When the time came for presentations, Soleil made her way to the small stage, her emerald green gown flowing elegantly around her legs, her notes steady in her hands despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. She'd been presenting program results for most of her career, but tonight felt different, more important, more personal, more connected to everything she'd dreamed of accomplishing. Good evening. 6 months ago, the Carver Educational Foundation launched pilot programs in 3 Hartford area community centers, designed to bridge the gap between academic learning and creative expression for students in underserved neighborhoods. For the next 15 minutes, she presented data that told a story of transformation, academic improvement, behavioral changes, increased family engagement, and community partnerships that were creating sustainable support systems for students who'd previously been falling through educational cracks. Music and arts education aren't luxury add-ons to core curriculum, she concluded, her voice carrying the passion that had driven her work for over a decade. They're essential tools for developing critical thinking, emotional regulation, and creative problem-solving skills that serve students throughout their academic careers and beyond. The applause was enthusiastic and sustained, and as she made her way back to her table, Soleil felt the professional satisfaction of knowing she'd delivered exactly the presentation these donors needed to hear. Outstanding, Sebastian said quietly as she took her seat beside him, his pride evident in his expression. You just secured funding for expansion to at least 10 additional sites. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and follow-up conversations, business cards exchanged and preliminary commitments made to support expanded programming. By the time they left the hotel at nearly midnight, Soleil felt professionally exhilarated but physically exhausted. Your place, she said without hesitation when Sebastian asked. Aurelia's at her father's until Sunday, and your bathtub is big enough for 2 people. His answering smile was soft and heated in equal measure. I was hoping you'd say that. 3 weeks later, the text message that would change everything arrived on a Tuesday morning while Soleil was reviewing quarterly budget reports in her office. She glanced at her phone to see Donovan's name and felt her stomach immediately clench with familiar anxiety. I trust you're enjoying your new living arrangement. I've filed a motion for emergency custody review based on your decision to cohabitate with a romantic partner. The court date is December 15th. I suggest you find better legal representation this time. The casual cruelty of the timing and tone was so typically Donovan that she almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she forwarded the message to Sebastian and watched her phone ring 30 seconds later. Expected and manageable, Sebastian said without preamble when she answered. My attorney has been preparing for exactly this scenario. Emergency custody review sounds serious. It sounds scarier than it is. Donovan has to prove that our relationship creates an unsafe environment for Aurelia, which is going to be challenging since she's thriving. We're both stable adults with good jobs, and we've been building this relationship gradually with her well-being as the primary consideration. Sebastian's calm confidence steadied her racing heart, reminded her that this time she wasn't facing Donovan's manipulation alone. December 15th soon arrived, and Soleil sat in the waiting area outside courtroom 3, wearing her most conservative business suit and trying to calm her racing heart while Sebastian held her hand with steady pressure. Remember what Janet said, he murmured, referring to his attorney, who'd spent the past month preparing them for this hearing. Answer only what's asked, stay calm, don't let him provoke you into defensiveness. Janet Morrison was formidable in the way that only the best family law attorneys could be. Steel wrapped in tasteful pearls, with a reputation for protecting clients from exactly the kind of manipulation that Donovan specialized in. The courtroom proceedings felt surreal, Donovan's attorney painting her as an impulsive woman making poor decisions that prioritized romance over her daughter's well-being, while Janet calmly presented evidence of Aurelia's happiness and stability, character references from pediatricians and daycare providers, documentation of Sebastian's consistent presence in the child's life long before their romantic relationship began. Ms. Arnaud, Judge Catherine Walsh said finally, please tell me about your living situation and how you believe it affects your daughter's well-being. Soleil stood, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Your Honor, Sebastian and I have been best friends since we were 14 years old. He's been part of Aurelia's life since she was born, and she knows him as someone who loves and cares for her. Our decision to live together wasn't impulsive, it was the natural progression of a relationship that's been 20 years in the making. After what felt like hours of testimony and cross-examination, Judge Walsh reviewed her notes and looked up with the expression of someone who'd reached a decision. Based on the evidence presented, I find no grounds for emergency custody modification. Ms. Arnaud has demonstrated that her living arrangement provides a stable, loving environment for her daughter, and there's no evidence that the child has been harmed by this change. Relief flooded through Soleil's chest so intensely that she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. However, Judge Walsh continued, I am ordering a family evaluation to be conducted by the court's Social Services Department within the next 60 days. This evaluation will include interviews with all parties, observation of the child in both homes, and assessment of the overall family dynamics. As the court was dismissed, Donovan approached their table with the kind of smile that used to make Soleil's stomach clench with anxiety. Enjoy your Pyrrhic victory, he said quietly. Family evaluations can be illuminating, especially when they involve wealthy men who think they can buy their way into playing father to other people's children. Donovan, Sebastian said, rising to his full height, I'd be very careful about making threats in a courthouse. What Aurelia deserves, Soleil said, finding her voice and stepping up beside Sebastian, is to be loved and protected by people who actually care about her well-being instead of using her as a weapon in legal games. A month later, Dr. Patricia Hernandez, the court-appointed family evaluator, arrived at their apartment at exactly 2 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a warm smile, carrying a leather satchel and radiating professional competence that put nervous parents at ease. Ms. Arnaud? I'm Dr. Hernandez. Thank you for welcoming me into your home. Please, come in. And call me Soleil. The evaluation unfolded over several hours, Dr. Hernandez observing their normal afternoon routine, Sebastian reading stories while Aurelia colored, Soleil preparing snacks in the kitchen, the easy flow of conversation and activity that characterized their life together. She took notes occasionally but mostly just watched, paying attention to body language and interaction patterns. When Aurelia showed Dr. Hernandez her room, the evaluator seemed most interested in the photo gallery the child had created on one wall, pictures of herself with Sebastian and Soleil from various activities over the past year. Tell me about these pictures, Dr. Hernandez said, sitting cross-legged on the floor next to Aurelia's art table. That's from when we went to the zoo and I got to feed the giraffes. And that's from my birthday when Uncle Seb made me a special cake. And that's from when we went to the lake and Uncle Seb taught me how to skip rocks. Each photo told a story of gradual relationship building, of a man who'd been consistently present in a child's life long before romance entered the picture. Do you miss your old apartment? Dr. Hernandez asked. Sometimes. But this is better because Uncle Seb makes really good pancakes, and he knows all the best stories. And Mama is happier here. How do you know Mama is happier? Because she sings when she's cooking now, and she doesn't get worried when her phone rings. The observation was so astute, so innocently devastating in its accuracy, that Soleil had to blink back tears. Her 3-year-old had noticed the change in her anxiety levels, had connected her increased happiness to their new living situation with the kind of clarity that adults often miss. During the bedtime routine, Dr. Hernandez observed Sebastian reading stories while Soleil helped Aurelia into pajamas, the tag-team approach of parents who'd developed systems that worked for everyone involved. Good night, Uncle Seb, Aurelia said sleepily as he tucked her in. I love you. I love you too, sweet girl. Sweet dreams. The simple exchange, so natural and unforced, seemed to carry more weight than any formal testimony could have provided. After Aurelia was asleep, Dr. Hernandez spent another hour with Sebastian and Soleil together, asking about conflict resolution, financial planning, how they handled disagreements about parenting decisions. We don't always agree on everything, but we've never had trouble talking through problems and finding solutions that work for everyone, Sebastian explained. Dr. Hernandez nodded, making final notes before closing her folder. Thank you both for your openness today. You'll receive my report within 2 weeks, and it will be submitted to the court for Judge Walsh's review. Can you give us any sense of your impressions? Sebastian asked. I can tell you that Aurelia is a happy, well-adjusted child who feels secure and loved in this environment. The rest will be in my official report. 2 weeks later, the call came on a Friday afternoon while Soleil was in the middle of a foundation board meeting. When she finally checked her phone, she found a voicemail from Janet Morrison. Soleil, it's Janet. I have Dr. Hernandez's report. Call me when you get this message. They retreated to Sebastian's office and put the call on speaker. "I've reviewed Dr. Hernandez's report," Janet said without preamble, "and it's overwhelmingly positive. She recommends maintaining the current custody arrangement and notes that Aurelia is thriving in your household." Relief flooded through Soleil's chest so intensely that she had to sit down. "Really? Really? Dr. Hernandez specifically notes the stability of your relationship, the gradual way you integrated your households, and Aurelia's obvious comfort and security in your home. She describes Sebastian as a positive male role model who has developed appropriate boundaries and genuine affection for Aurelia." Sebastian's hand found Soleil's, squeezing with shared relief and triumph. "The report will be submitted to Judge Walsh next week," Janet continued, "and we'll have a final hearing on February 10th. Based on this evaluation, I expect Judge Walsh to deny Donovan's motion for custody modification." "So it's over? This round is over." Donovan could always file future motions, but this evaluation creates strong precedent that your household provides appropriate care for Aurelia. After ending the call, Sebastian pulled Soleil into his arms, both of them processing the magnitude of what they'd just learned. "We did it," he said softly. "We proved that what we've built is real and stable and good for all of us. I can't believe it's actually over." "It's not over, it's just beginning. We get to stop fighting for our family and start building our future." That evening, they celebrated with takeout Chinese food and Aurelia's favorite ice cream, telling her that the nice lady who'd visited had written a report saying how happy and healthy she was in their home. "I told you we were happy," Aurelia said matter-of-factly, more interested in her ice cream than in the legal implications of the evaluation. "Can we watch a movie now?" As they settled on the couch for movie night, Aurelia curled between them with her head on Sebastian's shoulder and her feet in Soleil's lap. Soleil felt the last knot of anxiety release from her chest. This was their family, chosen, fought for, evaluated, and officially approved. They'd weathered every storm that had been thrown at them, and they'd emerged stronger and more committed than ever. If you've ever found love that was worth fighting for, I'd love to hear your story. Share in the comments below how you knew when something was worth protecting, no matter what obstacles stood in your way. Chapter 5. 6 months later in June. The community center graduation ceremony was exactly the kind of event that reminded Soleil why she'd chosen education policy over more lucrative career paths. 47 students from their pilot music and arts programs were receiving certificates of completion, their families filling the center's main hall with proud applause and celebration. "Marcus, you're up next," Jamie called from the small stage where she was presenting certificates, and Soleil watched with professional pride and personal affection as the 12-year-old who'd once thrown chairs in anger walked confidently to accept recognition for his progress in both music and conflict resolution. "Miss Soleil." He waved enthusiastically from the stage, holding up his certificate. "I told you I was gonna learn how to play jazz piano." The audience laughed, and Soleil felt tears prick her eyes at the transformation that music education had created in a child who'd been written off by too many adults as a behavioral problem. "You should be proud," Sebastian said softly, appearing at her elbow with 2 cups of coffee from the refreshment table. "This program has changed lives." "We should be proud," she corrected, accepting the coffee gratefully. "None of this would exist without foundation support. The foundation provided funding. You provided vision, implementation, and the kind of care that actually reaches kids. There's a difference." 6 months had passed since the family evaluation, and their life had settled into rhythms that felt both comfortable and exciting. The final custody hearing had gone exactly as Janet had predicted. Judge Walsh had denied Donovan's motion and praised the stability of Aurelia's living situation. Donovan had filed an appeal, which had been promptly denied, and his subsequent attempts at legal harassment had been met with restraining orders that finally gave them peace. Professionally, Soleil's programs had exceeded every benchmark the foundation had established, leading to expansion funding that would bring arts education to every underserved school district in Connecticut. She'd been invited to present at national conferences, had been featured in education policy journals, and had received offers from larger foundations that she'd turned down without hesitation. "I'm exactly where I belong," she told the headhunter from the Gates Foundation. "Building something meaningful with people who share my values." Personally, Their life had deepened into the kind of domestic happiness that felt both miraculous and natural. Sebastian had officially adopted Aurelia 3 months earlier, a process that had required more paperwork than emotion since they'd been functioning as a family unit for over a year. The adoption ceremony had been small and perfect, just the three of them, Janet and Judge Walsh, who'd smiled warmly as she signed the papers that made their family legal as well as emotional. "Do I call you Daddy now?" Aurelia had asked Sebastian afterward, with the directness that never failed to make adults scramble for appropriate responses. "You can call me whatever feels right to you," he'd replied. "Daddy, Papa, Uncle Seb, or just Sebastian. What matters is that we're family now, officially and forever." She'd considered this seriously, then nodded. "I think I'll call you Daddy at home and Uncle Seb at school. That way everyone knows you're both." The compromise had been so perfectly Aurelia, practical, thoughtful, and designed to include everyone's comfort, that both adults had to blink back tears. Now, watching their daughter's friends receive recognition for artistic and academic growth, Soleil felt the deep satisfaction of work that aligned with values, love that had been tested and proven strong, family that had been chosen and fought for and legally recognized. "Mama! Daddy!" Aurelia appeared at their side, slightly breathless from running around the center with her friends. "Can we go get ice cream to celebrate Marcus and Destiny, and everyone?" "I think ice cream sounds perfect," Sebastian said, scooping her up despite her insistence that she was too big to be carried. "But first, we need to congratulate all your friends." As they made their rounds through the crowd, stopping to talk with parents and students and program staff, Soleil marveled at how natural this felt. The three of them moving through community spaces as a family unit, Aurelia dividing her attention between both parents with the confidence of a child who'd never had to choose loyalty. Miss Soleil, Marcus approached them as they were preparing to leave, his certificate carefully protected in a folder. "I wanted to say thank you for the music program and for believing I could learn even when I was being bad." "Marcus, you were never bad. You were frustrated and angry, and you needed better ways to express those feelings. Music just gave you the tools to do that. My mom says I'm going to be able to take real piano lessons now, because I proved I can stick with something." "That's wonderful. You're going to be an amazing musician." As they drove home, Aurelia chattering excitedly about the ceremony and her friends' achievements, Sebastian reached over to take Soleil's hand. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, noting her contemplative silence. "I was just thinking about the night we moved in together, when Donovan sent that threatening text. How scared I was that loving you would cost me everything that mattered. And now I realize that loving you gave me everything I'd been afraid to hope for. Work that matters, family that's strong enough to weather any storm, a life that feels authentic instead of performed. No regrets?" "None. Well, except maybe that it took us 20 years to figure out what Keisha knew when we were 22. His laugh was warm and familiar, the sound that had been her anchor through every storm. "Some things are worth waiting for. And some things are worth fighting for. Good thing we never have to choose between those two again." As they pulled into their building's garage, Aurelia already asleep in her car seat despite her earlier excitement, Soleil felt the deep contentment that came from knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Not just geographically, but emotionally, professionally, spiritually, every aspect of her life aligned with her truest self in ways that felt both miraculous and inevitable. "Home," Sebastian said softly, and the word carried weight that had nothing to do with real estate and everything to do with the people who filled spaces with love. "Home," she agreed, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones like a blessing. 3 weeks later, July. The engagement ring was a vintage Art Deco piece that Sebastian had found at an estate sale in New Orleans, the city where they'd first talked about jazz and authenticity and the kind of love that transcended circumstances. He'd carried it in his pocket for 3 weeks, waiting for the perfect moment to propose, but every opportunity had felt either too planned or too casual for something as significant as asking the woman he'd loved for 20 years to marry him. The moment that finally felt right came on an ordinary Tuesday evening, after Aurelia was asleep and they were cleaning up the dinner dishes together, moving around their kitchen with the practiced ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms over months of shared domestic life. "Soleil," he said as she loaded the dishwasher, and something in his tone made her look up from the task. "Yes?" I've been thinking about our future. About the life we've built together and where we want it to go next. She straightened, giving him her full attention, noting the nervous energy that was unusual for someone normally so confident in every situation. What kind of thinking? Instead of answering immediately, he pulled the small velvet box from his pocket and set it on the kitchen counter between them, the simple gesture speaking volumes that words couldn't capture. The kind of thinking that involves making this official in every possible way. The kind that involves promising forever instead of just hoping for it. Soleil stared at the box, her heart hammering against her ribs as years of friendship and 2 years of acknowledged love condensed into this single moment of possibility. Sebastian. I know we've already built a life together. I know we're already a family in every way that matters. But I want the world to know that you're choosing me, that I'm choosing you, that what we have isn't just convenience or companionship but the kind of love that deserves celebration. He opened the box to reveal a uniquely perfect ring, vintage elegance with modern stones, sophisticated but not ostentatious, exactly the kind of piece she would have chosen for herself if she'd been brave enough to dream that this moment would ever come. Soleil Arnaud, will you marry me? Will you let me love you officially and publicly and forever? Will you build the rest of our lives together? The question hung in the air between them, and she realized that her answer had been yes for longer than she'd been willing to admit to herself. Yes, when they were 18 and he'd driven to Boston at midnight because her voice sounded hollow on the phone. Yes, when he'd stood by her through the divorce without judgment or pressure. Yes, when he'd held Aurelia during her fever and she'd seen him as a father instead of just a friend. Yes, she said simply, watching his face transform with relief and joy. Yes to all of it. To forever and official and building whatever comes next together. He slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that were only slightly trembling, and she marveled at how right it felt, how natural, like the final piece of a puzzle that had been 20 years in the making. I love you, he said, pulling her into his arms for a kiss that tasted like promise and possibility and the kind of happiness that was worth every moment of waiting. I love you too. I have for so long that I can't remember not loving you. Later, after they'd called Keisha, who shrieked with excitement and claimed credit for predicting this moment since college, and his sister Grace, who cried and insisted on planning the engagement party, they sat on their couch with wine and music, planning a future that felt both thrilling and inevitable. What kind of wedding do you want? Sebastian asked, playing with her engagement ring, still marveling at the sight of it on her finger. Small. Family and close friends. Somewhere meaningful instead of somewhere impressive. The community center where we met again as adults? Perfect. With music, obviously. And Aurelia as flower girl, if she wants to. She's going to want to plan the entire ceremony. You know that, right? I'm counting on it. She has excellent taste in celebrations. They talked until nearly midnight, mapping out wedding plans and honeymoon possibilities and the practical considerations of legally joining their lives. But underneath the logistics was a deeper conversation about the kind of marriage they wanted to build, the kind of partnership that would honor both their individual growth and their shared dreams. I don't want to lose myself in this, Soleil said quietly, voicing the fear that lingered despite everything they'd already proven together. I spent so many years being diminished by marriage that I'm still scared of disappearing into someone else's expectations. You won't disappear, Sebastian said with absolute certainty. You'll expand. We both will. Marriage won't make you smaller, Soleil, it'll give you a partner in becoming everything you're meant to be. The conviction in his voice, backed by 2 years of evidence that he'd supported her professional growth and personal healing without asking her to change or compromise her essential self, finally quieted the last whispers of doubt. When? She asked. Whenever you're ready. Tomorrow, next month, next year, I've waited 20 years for this. I can wait however long you need. I don't want to wait, she realized as she said it. I want to be your wife. I want Aurelia to see what healthy marriage looks like. I want to start building the next chapter of our story. Fall wedding? Fall wedding. October, when the leaves are changing and everything feels like possibility. The end. Soleil and Sebastian's story reminds us that the best foundations for lasting love are often built on genuine friendship, mutual respect, and the patience to wait for timing that serves everyone involved. Their 20-year journey from prep school friends to life partners shows us that some relationships require seasons of growth before they can bloom into their fullest potential. If this story touched your heart, give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more tales of unexpected love and second chances. Share in the comments below, have you ever found love where you least expected it? What advice would you give to someone afraid to risk a friendship for the possibility of something deeper? Tomorrow, we'll share another story of love conquering fear, hearts finding their way home, and the courage it takes to believe in happily ever after. You won't want to miss it.